Am I the a-hole for refusing to give my kidney to the sister who let me die? My whole family is calling me a monster, but they don't know what I found in her diary. My life has always been measured in hospital visits, in needle pricks and sterile white rooms. Since I was a kid, my chronic kidney disease has been the fifth member of our family, the quiet, demanding guest at every dinner table. Most days living with it is just exhausting. 3 times a week, 4 hours at a time, I sit in a reclining chair at the dialysis center, while a machine does the work my own body can't. It leaves me drained, a ghost of myself with a constant metallic taste in my mouth. But through it all, my family has been my rock, especially my older sister Olivia. She's the one I've always looked up to. While I was the sickly one, she was the brilliant one, the star student, the successful lawyer, the daughter my parents could brag about without a hint of sadness in their voices. But she never made me feel less than. She was my fiercest protector. I remember one afternoon, after a particularly brutal dialysis session, I was lying on the couch, too tired to even lift my head. The world felt gray and fuzzy. The front door opened and Olivia came in, her arms full of grocery bags. She didn't say a word. She just went into the kitchen, and 20 minutes later, the smell of roasted garlic and lemon filled the house. She came back with a tray. On it was a perfectly grilled piece of salmon, some steamed asparagus, and a small portion of quinoa. It was a perfect kidney-friendly meal, the kind of bland, low-sodium food I was supposed to eat but was usually too tired to make. She sat on the floor next to the couch and just held the tray for me while I ate. "You just focus on getting stronger," she whispered, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. "I'll take care of the rest." In those moments, my love for her felt infinite. She was my best friend, my hero. A few weeks later, things got worse. My doctors told me the dialysis wasn't enough anymore. I needed a transplant, and I needed one soon. The news landed like a grenade in the middle of our family. That night, at dinner, my dad stood up, his face grim but determined. "Your mother and I got tested today," he announced to both of us, "to be donors. And Olivia, she got tested this morning too." My head snapped up. Olivia, who was sitting next to me, reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it tight. Her palm was warm and steady. "Whatever it takes, Chloe," she said, her voice full of a fierce, protective love that made my eyes well up. "We'll get you through this. I promise." My parents were looking at her with so much pride. My perfect, selfless sister willing to give me a piece of herself to save my life. I squeezed her hand back, my heart so full of gratitude I could barely breathe. I was terrified of the future, of the surgery, of the endless waiting. But with Olivia by my side, I knew I wasn't alone. I had my protector, and I believed with every fiber of my being that she would never, ever let anything bad happen to me. The weeks that followed were a slow, agonizing descent. Hope faded with each passing day. My parents came back from their tests with the news. They were both partial matches, but not ideal donors. The risk of rejection was too high. Olivia told us her results hadn't come in yet, that the lab was backed up. She seemed just as anxious as the rest of us, constantly checking her phone for a call from the hospital. I was getting weaker. Walking from my bedroom to the kitchen left me breathless. The world started to feel like it was wrapped in cotton, every sound muffled, every color muted. I was at the top of the transplant list, a grim honor that meant I was the sickest person waiting. All we could do was hope, and wait for a call that never came. One afternoon, the mail arrived. I was sitting on the porch trying to get some sun when I saw the envelope from the hospital. My heart leaped. Maybe this was it. News of a match. But as I picked it up, I noticed something odd. The letter was addressed to Olivia, but at our parents' address, where I was staying. A simple mistake, I thought. I almost set it aside for her, but my hands were already tearing it open. I was desperate for any news, any sliver of hope. The letterhead was from the transplant department. My eyes scanned the page, my breath catching in my throat. "Dear Ms. Olivia Vance, we are pleased to inform you that you are a perfect 6 out of 6 antigen match for your sister, Chloe Vance." I read the sentence again. And again. The words blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. A perfect match. The best possible match a person could have. My world, which had been slowly fading to gray, went completely, terrifyingly silent. The hum of the cicadas in the trees, the distant sound of a lawnmower, my own heartbeat, it all just stopped. I looked at the date on the top of the letter. It was from 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. She had known for 6 weeks. Every day for the past 6 weeks, she had sat with me after dialysis. She had held my hand. She had told me to stay strong. She had watched me get weaker and weaker, knowing she held the cure inside her own body. And she had said nothing. That evening, I waited for her in the living room, the letter clutched in my sweaty hand. When she walked in, all smiles and concern, asking how I was feeling, I just held it out to her. She took it, her smile faltering as she read the first line. I watched her face. For a split second, I saw it: panic, pure, unadulterated panic. Then just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a mask of confusion. What is this? She stammered, shaking her head. A perfect match? Chloe, this has to be a mistake. A typo. I never got this letter. My parents rushed in, drawn by the tension in the room. My mom took the letter, her eyes scanning it quickly. Oh, honey, she said, turning to me, her voice dripping with pity. The stress must be getting to you. You know how labs are. They make mistakes all the time. It's dated 6 weeks ago, I said, my voice shaking. She knew. No, I didn't. Olivia insisted, her eyes filling with tears. I would have told you. You're my sister. How can you think I would do this? My dad put his arm around me. Chloe, you're not well. You're exhausted. You're seeing conspiracies where there aren't any. Olivia would never, ever hurt you. You know that. They were all looking at me like I was the crazy one. Like my sickness had finally broken my mind. Olivia was crying in my mother's arms, the perfect wounded victim. And I just stood there, the letter in my hand, feeling like a worthless piece of paper. They didn't just believe her lie. They needed to believe it. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting a disease anymore. I was fighting my own family. And I was completely, utterly alone. They treated me like I was made of glass after that night. Every conversation was gentle, every question laced with pity. They thought I was losing my mind, that the sickness was finally taking my spirit along with my body. But it wasn't paranoia. It was clarity. For the first time, I was seeing my sister not as my protector, but as a stranger. And I had to know why. The next day, Olivia went out for a spa day my mom had insisted she take to de-stress from my supposed accusations. The house was quiet. My parents were at a doctor's appointment with me. I was lying in bed feeling that familiar wave of exhaustion when a thought, cold and sharp, cut through the fog. Her room. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe nothing. Maybe just a way to prove my own gut feeling wrong. I slipped out of bed, my movements slow and deliberate, and went to her bedroom. It was exactly like her, perfectly organized, tastefully decorated, not a thing out of place. It smelled like her perfume, a light floral scent that now made my stomach turn. I started searching. Her desk drawers, her closet. Nothing. Just clothes and books and the artifacts of a perfect life. I was about to give up, to let the guilt of invading her privacy win, when I saw it. Tucked away on the top shelf of her closet, behind a stack of old yearbooks, was a simple, leather-bound shoebox. My heart started pounding. I pulled it down, my hands shaking as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among old photographs and concert tickets, was a diary. Her diary. I sat on her bed, the book in my lap, and I opened it. Her handwriting was a neat, elegant cursive. I flipped through the pages until I found the entries from 6 weeks ago. And there it was. The first entry was dated the day after she got tested. The handwriting was excited, almost giddy. Got the results. Perfect match. It's almost too easy. Now all I have to do is wait. Wait? Wait for what? I kept reading, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. A few pages later, another entry. This one more. Practical. Spoke to Dad's financial advisor today, just casually. With Chloe gone, Mom and Dad's estate will be mine entirely. No more splitting everything. No more paying for her endless medical bills. It sounds cold, I know, but it's just practical. I have my own future to think about. I had to put the diary down. I walked to her window and just stared out at the street, my own reflection a pale, ghostly image in the glass. She wasn't just hiding the truth. She was waiting for me to die, so she could get my money, my share of the money. I picked up the diary again, my hands numb. I flipped forward a few more pages, to an entry from last week. The day she'd brought me that perfectly cooked salmon. The day she'd wiped a tear from my cheek. She's getting weaker. Dr. Evans said it could be any day now. It's hard pretending to be so worried. But I just have to keep playing this supportive sister a little longer. She looks at me with so much trust in her eyes. It almost makes me feel bad. Almost. And then at the bottom of the page, she had scrawled one final sentence. A sentence that will be burned into my memory for the rest of my life. It's not murder if you just don't save someone. I closed the diary. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something inside me had gone cold and quiet. The sister I had loved, the hero I had worshipped. She had never existed. In her place was a monster, patiently waiting for me to die so she could cash in. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about a kidney anymore. This was about survival. I put the diary back in the shoebox back on the shelf, and walked out of her room. I didn't take it with me. Instead, I took out my phone and photographed every single damning page, the flash from the camera lighting up the dark corners of her perfect, orderly room. Then I went back to my own bed and waited. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day I got weaker. Every day Olivia's performance got stronger. She would sit by my bed, reading to me, her voice a soft, soothing murmur. She'd hold my hand, her touch gentle, and tell me stories about the life we'd have once I was better. All the while I knew she was just waiting for me to die. And I had to lie there and let her, my face a mask of grateful affection, because exposing her now would do nothing. My family had already shown me whose side they were on. A week later, I was back in the hospital. My numbers were crashing. The world had shrunk to the 4 white walls of my room and the rhythmic beep of the machines I was tethered to. My family was a constant presence, a rotating vigil of anxious faces. And Olivia was the star of the show. She was the distraught, devoted sister. She wept at my bedside. She argued with nurses. She held my hand so tight her knuckles were white, performing her grief for everyone to see. I was barely conscious, drifting in and out of a gray, fuzzy fog. But even through the haze, I could feel the falseness of her touch. I could hear the lie in her voice. And then, the miracle happened. That's what everyone called it. A miracle. I was at the absolute bottom, my body giving up, when the call came. A donor, a perfect match from a car accident victim. A stranger's tragedy had become my salvation. The transplant was a blur. Waking up in the ICU, the feeling of a new life humming inside me. The pain, yes, but underneath it, a profound, breathtaking sense of survival. I had made it. Despite her, my recovery was slow but steady. My family was overjoyed, their relief palpable. But as I got stronger, I grew quieter. I kept my distance. The secret I was carrying was a physical weight, a wall between me and them. They all thought it was post-surgery trauma, a normal reaction to a near-death experience. They kept telling me to be patient with myself, that the joy would come back, but the joy couldn't come back. Not when I knew what I knew. One afternoon, a few days after the surgery, I was dozing in my hospital bed. My parents had gone down to the cafeteria. Olivia was sitting in the chair next to my bed, thinking I was asleep. I heard her on the phone, her voice a low whisper. It was my mother calling from downstairs. Is she still sleeping? My mom asked. Yeah, Olivia said, and I heard her sigh, a sound of pure, unadulterated frustration. She's fine. The doctors are saying it was a complete success. There was a pause. And then she said the words that confirmed everything. The words that turned the cold anger in my heart into something permanent. Well, she said, her voice laced with a bitterness that was impossible to mistake. I guess we'll have to put the inheritance plans on hold. I heard my mother shush her, a quick, panicked sound. Olivia, she might hear you. But I didn't move. I kept my breathing even, my eyes closed. I just lay there, perfectly still, and let the truth of what my sister was settle over me. This wasn't just a passive willingness to let me die. This was an active disappointment that I had lived. And at that moment, I knew I could never look at her, or my family, the same way again. 3 years. That's how long I held the silence. 3 years of birthdays, holidays, and Sunday dinners, all spent in a polite, suffocating Cold War. On the outside, we were a family again. Healed, a success story. I had my miracle transplant and everyone could finally breathe. But they didn't know I was breathing different air. I moved out. Got my own apartment. I finished my degree, got a job in graphic design, and I even met someone, a kind, funny man named Liam who knew nothing of the rot at the core of my family. For the first time in my life, I was healthy. I could travel, I could eat what I wanted, I could stay out late without worrying about my next dialysis appointment. I was living a life I never thought I'd have, but the secret, it was a constant companion. A ghost that sat at every family gathering. I'd watch Olivia across the Thanksgiving table, laughing with our cousins, and I'd feel nothing. Just a hollow echo where love used to be. I'd see my parents look at her with such pride, their successful, brilliant daughter, and I'd have to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming the truth. They didn't know. They didn't know that every time I looked at her, I saw her diary in my hands. I heard her disappointed sigh in that hospital room. They just saw me as quiet, distant. They chalked it up to the trauma of my illness, and in a way they were right. I was traumatized. Just not by the disease, I couldn't tell them. How do you tell your parents that their perfect daughter was willing to let their other daughter die for money? How do you detonate a bomb like that in the middle of a family and expect anything to survive? So I stayed silent. I carried the weight alone because I believed that protecting their image of a happy family was my burden to bear. I had survived, and that felt like it had to be enough. Olivia, of course, thrived. Her law firm made her a partner. She bought a beautiful condo downtown. She was the picture of success. And she never missed an opportunity to remind me how fortunate I was. "You're so lucky, Chloe," she'd say at Christmas, a passive-aggressive little smile on her face. Getting that second chance. Not everyone is so blessed. It took every ounce of my self-control not to throw my wine in her face. Lucky? I was lucky a stranger died. I was lucky her plan to let me waste away had been interrupted by fate. She'd talk about her stress at work, the pressure of her career, and then look at me with pity. It must be nice, she'd say, to have a less demanding job. To not have to worry about all the pressures of real life. She still saw me as the sickly, fragile little sister, but now with a new twist. The lucky one. The one who'd gotten a free pass. And through it all, I said nothing. I just smiled and nodded and let the silence stretch on. I let her believe she had gotten away with it. I let my parents believe their family had been healed. But the photos of her diary pages were still on my phone, tucked away in a hidden folder. A little digital time bomb waiting. I didn't know when or if I would ever use it. I just knew I couldn't delete it. And for 3 years, that's how we lived, in a fragile, hollow peace. A family held together by a lie I was forced to keep. Until the day a different kind of letter arrived, and the entire twisted game was turned on its head. The call came on a Sunday afternoon. I was at home, sketching out a new design for a client, my apartment filled with the warm afternoon light. It was my mom. I almost didn't answer. Our calls had become so strained, so full of unspoken things. But something in the way the phone just kept ringing made my stomach clench. "Chloe?" Her voice was a wreck. A raw, ragged sound I hadn't heard since the worst days of my own illness. "It's Olivia. You need to come to the hospital, now." My blood ran cold. "What happened? Is she okay? I don't know," she sobbed. "Her kidneys, they're failing." The irony was so thick, so suffocating, I almost laughed. I drove to the hospital in a daze. The familiar smell of antiseptic and floor wax hit me the moment I walked through the automatic doors. I found my parents in the waiting room of the renal ward, the same waiting room where they had spent countless hours waiting for news about me. My dad looked like he had aged 10 years in a few hours. My mom's face was pale and blotchy from crying. The doctor came out to speak with us. He was a kind, tired-looking man. He explained it in calm clinical terms. Acute kidney failure, a rare autoimmune reaction. Both of her kidneys were shutting down, and they didn't know why. "We've put her on emergency dialysis," he said, "but it's a temporary measure. She needs a transplant, urgently." I just stared at him, the echo of his words bouncing around in my head. A transplant. My parents started asking frantic questions about the waiting list, about donors. The doctor's face was grim. "That's the other complication," he said, looking at his chart. "Olivia has a very rare blood type and a complex antigen profile. The odds of finding a match on the deceased donor list are statistically negligible. A living relative is her only real hope." My parents looked at each other and then at me. I could see the dawning, desperate hope in their eyes. But I knew something they didn't. When we had all been tested for me, the doctors had explained our genetics. My parents were only partial, 3 out of 6 antigen matches for me. Which meant they were only partial matches for Olivia, too. "We're not good matches," my dad said, his voice cracking. The doctors told us that last time. The risk of rejection? That's true, the doctor said, his eyes shifting to me. But antigen profiles are inherited. Sometimes, in rare cases, a sibling can be a perfect match, even when the parents aren't. And there it was. The moment the entire universe seemed to snap into a perfect, cruel alignment. The one thing Olivia had been, the one thing she had hidden to let me die, was a perfect 6 out of 6 match. My mother turned to me, her hands grabbing my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Her voice was no longer a mother's gentle plea. It was a demand. "Chloe," she said, her eyes boring into mine, wild with a desperate, terrifying hope. "You have to get tested. You have to. You're her only chance." I looked at my mother's frantic face, at my father's broken one. I thought about Olivia, lying in a hospital bed a few feet away, her body failing her just as she had been willing to let mine fail. And I thought about the photos of her diary, still saved, still hidden in a folder on my phone. They thought this was a moment of hope, a chance for a miracle. They had no idea it was about to become a reckoning. They didn't give me a choice. The family meeting was framed as a dinner, but I knew what it really was. An intervention. A tribunal. I walked into my parents' house and the air was thick with a desperate, cloying sweetness. The smell of my mom's pot roast, a dish she only made for the most serious of occasions, hung in the air. They were all there. My parents, looking at me with a pleading anxiety that made my skin crawl. And Olivia. She was sitting on the couch wrapped in a blanket, looking pale and fragile and terrified. She looked exactly like I used to. They didn't wait for dinner. My dad started before I even had my coat off. "Chloe, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "Your sister? She needs you?" My mom jumped in, her voice trembling. "She's your sister, Chloe. Your only sister. How can you even hesitate? We're a family. We're supposed to save each other." I just stood there, my bag still on my shoulder, and listened. I let them build their case. I let them weave their story of family obligation and sisterly love. Then, it was Olivia's turn. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with perfectly formed tears. Her performance was breathtaking. "I know I haven't been the best sister," she whispered, her voice cracking. I'm so jealous of you when we were younger. Of the attention you got. I said horrible things. I was a terrible sister. And I am so sorry. It was a brilliant confession. Vague enough to be meaningless, but emotional enough to be convincing. She was apologizing for teenage jealousy, not for attempted murder by neglect. My parents were eating it up, nodding along, their faces softening with forgiveness. They looked at me, their expressions expectant, waiting for me to absolve her. To absolve them all. The pressure in the room was immense. A physical weight. They were all staring at me, their collective will pressing down on me, demanding that I do the right thing. That I save her. That I forget. That I forgive. And in that moment, something inside me, that quiet, patient thing that had been holding the truth for 3 long years, snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just calmly set my bag down, reached into my pocket, and pulled out my phone. "You're right," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the thick emotional fog in the room. "You were a terrible sister." I opened the Photos app. I scrolled to a hidden folder, and I turned the screen toward them. On it was a crystal-clear image of the hospital letter. The one they all said was a mistake. The one they said I had imagined in a grief-stricken haze. The date was clearly visible. The recipient's name, Olivia Vance, was in bold. The damning sentence was highlighted. "We are pleased to inform you that you are a perfect 6 out of 6 antigen match." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I watched their faces. My mom's confusion. My dad's dawning horror. And Olivia's face went completely, utterly white. The mask of the fragile victim shattered, and for the first time they saw the panic underneath. I looked directly at her, my voice as cold and dead as the love I once had for her. "You knew," I said. "You were a perfect match for me, and you sat by my bed, and you watched me die." The silence in the room was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. It lasted for maybe 10 seconds. And then, the performance began again. Olivia started to cry. Not the calculated pretty tears from before, but a raw, panicked sob. "I was scared," she wailed, her voice cracking. "I was so scared of the surgery. I was young. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. It was a brilliant pivot. And my parents, they grabbed onto it like a lifeline. She was scared, Chloe, my mother said, her voice instantly shifting from shock to defense. She made a mistake. A terrible mistake, yes, but she was just a kid herself. Are you really going to hold a youthful fear against her for the rest of her life? My father stepped forward, his face a mask of pained disappointment. Not in her, but in me. So this is what this is about? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. Revenge, is that it? You got your miracle, you got healthy, and you held on to this for 3 years just so you could have this moment? So you could punish her? I just stared at them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They had seen the proof, the undeniable black and white proof of her deception. And their first instinct, their only instinct, was to protect her, to make excuses for her, to make me the villain. You're going to let your sister die to prove a point? My dad's voice rose, filled with a righteous anger that was completely misdirected. What kind of monster are you, Chloe? A monster. He called me a monster. Me. The girl who had spent her entire life in and out of hospitals. The girl who had almost died while his perfect daughter waited for her inheritance. The hypocrisy was so staggering, it almost took my breath away. The emotional manipulation was a full court press now. My mother started weeping openly, talking about how she couldn't bear to lose another child, how this would destroy her. My father paced the room, his hands clenched into fists, talking about his dying daughter, about the horror of watching Olivia waste away on dialysis, using my own past suffering as a weapon against me. They were a team, the three of them united in their narrative. Olivia, the flawed but forgivable victim of her own fear, and me, the cold, vengeful monster hoarding my health, demanding a pound of flesh. And I realized in that moment that the letter wasn't enough. The facts weren't enough. They didn't want the truth. They wanted a story they could live with. Fine. I would give them a story they couldn't ignore. I took out my phone again. You want to talk about youthful fear? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Let's talk about it. I scrolled to the audio file I had saved 3 years ago. The one I had secretly recorded from my hospital bed when I was supposedly asleep. The one I had listened to 1,000 times in the dead of night. I hit play. The small speaker of my phone filled the silent room with the sound of Olivia's voice. A crisp, clear, annoyed whisper. Well, she says, her voice laced with a bitterness that was impossible to mistake. I guess we'll have to put the inheritance plans on hold. I watched their faces as the words hung in the air. I watched the excuses die in their eyes. I watched the dawning, sickening realization that this was never about fear. And I knew even this still wasn't going to be enough. For a moment, no one spoke. The audio clip played out, and then there was just silence, thick and heavy. I watched my mother's face. She looked lost, confused. She started to mumble something about Olivia not meaning it, that she was just upset, that grief makes people say crazy things. My father just stood there, his jaw clenched, still trying to find a way to make this my fault. They were still trying to find an excuse. Still trying to protect their perfect daughter, even after hearing her cold disappointment that I had lived. My own voice, when it came, was devoid of any emotion. It felt like I was a million miles away, just a narrator telling a story. You want to talk about fear? I said, unlocking my phone again. You want to talk about what was really going on? Let's talk about it. I opened the hidden folder. The one with the photos I had taken 3 years ago. The ones I had looked at every single night before I went to sleep. This is from her diary, I said. 6 weeks before my transplant, I started to read. My voice was a monotone, a flat recitation of her words. Got the results. Perfect match. It's almost too easy. Now all I have to do is wait. I paused and looked at them. My mother was shaking her head, a soft no escaping her lips. I continued. A week later, I said, my eyes fixed on the screen of my phone. With Chloe gone, Mom and Dad's estate will be mine entirely. No more splitting everything. No more paying for her endless medical bills. My dad's face went white. The anger he had directed at me. It just evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, sickening shock. He looked at Olivia, his daughter, his brilliant, successful daughter, as if he had never seen her before. And then I read the last one, the one that had been the soundtrack to my nightmares for 3 years. My voice didn't waver. It was as steady as a flat line. She's getting weaker. Dr. Evans said it could be any day now. It's hard, pretending to be so worried. but I just have to keep playing the supportive sister a little longer. It's not murder if you just don't save someone. The words hung in the air. Murder, not fear, not panic. Murder. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't tense. It was dead. It was the silence of a tomb. The sound of a family breaking apart, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating weight of the truth. I looked up from my phone. My parents were staring at Olivia. Their faces were mirrors of horror and disbelief. And Olivia? She wasn't crying anymore. Her face had crumbled. The mask of the victim, of the scared sister, of the perfect daughter was gone. And for the first time, my parents were seeing the person who had been there all along. A cold, calculating monster who was willing to watch me die for a bigger share of their money. I looked at my mother, then at my father. Their eyes finally met mine, and in them I saw the shame, the guilt, the dawning, unbearable understanding of what they had done. Of who they had protected. Of who they had called a monster. You asked me what kind of monster I am, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Now you know the answer. I slowly closed the folder on my phone, the click echoing in the dead silence. My mother was openly weeping now, her hands covering her face. My father just stood there, a statue carved from grief and shame, staring at the daughter he never really knew. Olivia hadn't moved. She was just broken, a ruin of a person. They all looked at me, their eyes begging, pleading for me to do something, to fix this, to save her, to save them. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with the poison of our family's secrets. I'm not going to let her die, I said, my voice quiet but clear, and in that moment, I saw it. A flicker of hope, of desperate, selfish hope in my parents' eyes. They thought this was it, the moment of forgiveness, the moment the good, sickly daughter would do her duty and save her monstrous sister, and they could all pretend this never happened. I let the hope hang in the air for a beat, and then I extinguished it. But I'm not going to save her either. My mother's head snapped up, her face a mask of confusion. What do you mean? I mean, I said, looking at each of them in turn, that I am officially and permanently removing myself from the donor pool. I will not be giving her my kidney. Not now. Not ever. The hope in their eyes died, replaced by a dawning horror. This isn't about revenge, I continued, my voice gaining strength. This isn't about punishment. This is about a simple, undeniable fact. I cannot, in good conscience, give a piece of my own body, the body I fought so hard to save, to a person who is willing to stand by and watch me die for money. Olivia let out a small, wounded sound, but I didn't look at her. I was looking at my parents. She made her choice 3 years ago, I said, my voice as sharp as a scalpel. She chose her inheritance over my life. She waited. She hoped. She was disappointed when I survived. Now, I'm making mine. I walked to the front door, my bag still sitting where I'd left it. I picked it up. You wanted to know, I said, turning back to face them one last time. If I could let my sister die to prove a point. You called me a monster for even hesitating. But you've been asking the wrong question this whole time. I looked at my father, at my mother, at the wreckage of the family they had tried so desperately to keep perfect on the surface. The better question is this, I said. What kind of people would beg me to save a sister who was willing to let me die for an inheritance? I didn't wait for an answer. I turned, opened the front door, and walked out, leaving them behind in the ruins of their perfect family. I could hear their voices behind me, pleading, crying, calling my name. But I didn't stop. I just kept walking into the clean, cold air, finally free. So, was I right to walk away? Or did I become the monster they accused me of being? Let me know what you would have done in the comments below. If you believe justice is more complicated than forgiveness, hit that like button, and subscribe to Reddit Unpacked for more stories that will make you question everything.